allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get into the invocation, I would like to take a moment of silence to remember former Rotarian Jack Moringa, who passed away last week. Jack was a member for nearly 30 years before resigning in 2019. So please let us take a moment of silence for Jack and for his family. Thank you. Now Megan Holbrook, digital strategist at Digital Ease LLC, will give our invocation.
Hope. If you are like me, there have been many reasons to lose hope in the news recently. Afghanistan, Haiti, hurricanes and fires and floods, Texas. Too many lives lost, too many civil rights endangered, but hopelessness leads to helplessness. When we do not hope, we do not see reason to help, to stay engaged. Do not ever forget that you can make a difference in one life, 10 lives, 1,000 lives. Rotary was founded on this notion of service, and look at the lives that we have helped through our work on polio. People might have said, what an enormous task. How can we possibly succeed? But effort, persistence, patience, hope led us to this mission. So please do not lose hope. Acknowledge that we cannot solve every problem, but don't limit your desire to try again in different ways. Don't lose hope. Continue to hold hope in your heart.
Thank you, Megan. I'd also like to thank our sponsors whose logos ran on the PowerPoint before the presentation. If you are interested in being a sponsor, please contact Mary and the Rotary office. I'd like to welcome our virtual audience, or actually I think the internet's out, so we will be live streaming this later. So welcome, I guess, a couple hours from now to those of you trying to join online. Also like to thank welcome a couple of the guests in the room. So we've got Millie Kobe from Atlas, Milwaukee, as well as Mary Chris Coriel from St. Joan Antietam High School. Thank you and welcome to our club. All right, in a few minutes, fellow Rotarian Chris Kolenda will update us on Afghanistan and his take on a lot of what's happening over there. But before we get into that, we do have some Rotary announcements, starting off with formally welcoming a new member to our club. So right now, Alex Chu will introduce our newest Rotarian at the podium.
Thank you, Ted. Good afternoon. I'm Alex Chu. I'm a realtor with Keller Williams, and it's my pleasure today to introduce you to Craig Bullock. Craig Bullock has been a financial advisor for Edward Jones in Shorewood since 2013. Before joining Edward Jones, he had a 10-year career as a commodities broker at the Chicago Board of Trade, followed by 20 years in the world of business-to-business sales. His unique experience has given him a special eye towards understanding the complex world of finance and how it and our concerns in life are intertwined. Craig was born in Milwaukee and attended Dominican High School and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He and his wife, Jane, have lived in Shorewood since 2001. He has two children, Henry and Tessa. Henry is entering his senior year at the University of Iowa, majoring in engineering. Tessa will be a sophomore at the University of Minnesota. We have a 16-month-old Fox Red Labrador Retriever named Rosie. Craig currently serves as a commissioner in the Shorewood Chief of Police Board and is a member of the Shorewood Business Improvement District. I have known Craig for about 20 years and know him to be a serious and responsible person who also happens to have a great sense of humor. I know he will make a terrific Rotarian, and I ask that you join me in welcoming him to our club.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I really look forward to meeting and working with everybody here, and I also look forward to advancing everything about Rotary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Here's your Rotary.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and Craig, we're very excited to have you as part of our club. Just a reminder to everybody, this will not be the last reminder, but beginning on Tuesday, October 5th, we will have our inaugural breakfast meeting, not lunch. So for a period of time, we'll be trying a breakfast meeting on the first Tuesday of the month in Memorial Hall. So we'll continue offering our excellent Rotary programming and hopefully be able to make that programming available to members who are a little more challenged to make it to the lunch meeting. So the breakfast buffet will begin at 7:30. Programming will start at 8, and by 9 o'clock, everybody will be out of here and on their way. October 5th, we've got Peter Fagan, president of the Milwaukee Bucks, here as our speaker, so mark it on your calendars. You guys won't want to miss it. I'd like to thank everybody who showed up on Saturday at St. Anne's. It was a great turnout. We were able to harvest lots of fruits and vegetables from their garden, that stuff that was able to be canned and preserved to be able to be used this fall. So please continue to watch your emails for future done-in-a-day opportunities. Once again, Rotary is proudly sponsoring Hike Milwaukee. For those of you who aren't familiar with Hike Milwaukee, it's a fundraising event for the Urban Ecology Center as well as our Milwaukee Rotary Centennial Arboretum. It will run from September 25th until October 2nd, and like last year, because of COVID, instead of one big event, it's spread out over the course of a week. So September 25th until October 22nd are the dates. There are a series of different hikes people can sign up for, from a little longer and a little more strenuous to something that's short and leisurely. So as a sponsor, Rotary has 55 complimentary tickets. Look in your emails for information on how to register, invite your friends and family, and see what you can do to show up to support not only our Milwaukee Rotary Centennial Arboretum, but the Urban Ecology Center as well. The next Rotary Social will be on Wednesday, September 15th. We will be returning to the Milwaukee Yacht Club, hopefully to enjoy some of the last beautiful days of summer here. So starting at 5 p.m., join us for appetizers and a cash bar. Catch up with fellow Rotarians. It will be a great time for all. And now I'd like to welcome up Melissa Marshka. She has an announcement regarding the Golf Classic.
Hello. The Scholarship Golf Classic auction opens today. Even if you're not golfing next week in take 2 of our golf outing, you can get in on the fun by bidding on some great auction items, all to benefit our scholarship program. You can catch a sneak peek today. We have plenty of alcohol in the auction, as you can see. There's a theme. There's a beautiful bottle of bourbon that was graciously donated by Lloyd Dickinson. For golf enthusiasts, there are tickets to the Ryder Cup and 2 tickets to the 2022 PGA Championship at Southern Hills in Tulsa, Oklahoma, complete with lodging, donated by Jackie Hurd Barber. I checked the average temperature for Tulsa in May, and it's 80. So that might feel pretty good after a long Milwaukee winter. There are also tickets for the Marcus, the Rep, and the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. If you're registered to golf, click on the link that you received in an email or text this morning. If you're not registered to golf, you can text RCM Classic to 76278 to view and bid on auction items today. Anybody can bid from anywhere up until 3:15 on Monday. Bid high, bid often, all to support our scholars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. One final announcement. So one of our major initiatives this year has been on the membership side, really making up for the last 18 months where connecting with each other and being able to invite people to our Rotary meetings has been, for lack of a better word, a real challenge. So, we are a unique organization. We encourage connecting, learning, making a difference in our communities and around the world. And it's critical now more than ever to make sure we're inviting people to enjoy this Rotary experience with us. At our August board meeting, the board set a goal of bringing in 50 new members this year. And we're pretty confident that half those members, 25 of those members, would be able to be recruited by the board. They thought the other 300 Rotarians would be able to pick up those other 25 members and bring them into the club. Well, the recruitment committee, upon hearing the goals, thought that they could easily out-recruit the board in terms of their membership, and there's no competition there. But a friendly competition, I think, is going to come out of this challenge. So, fortunately for everybody, regardless of whether the board brings in their members, more members, or the rest of the club brings in their more members, the ultimate winner is the community as a whole and the Rotary Club in particular. So Maggie Opplinger, the chair of the recruitment committee and president and CEO of the Florentine Opera, she's going to really take a lead in terms of the recruitment efforts for the 300 members for the rest of the club. First step here is pretty easy, guys. Invite a friend to a meeting. Lunch meeting, the breakfast meeting on October 5th. Best way to introduce people to Rotary is to bring them along with you. So at the August board meeting, we did approve 3 new members. Those 3 members all did come from the rest of the club, the 300 other Rotarians. So obviously, the board here already at a little disadvantage at 23 people versus 300. They're also starting 3 people behind in terms of the recruiting challenge. So again, this is something we are just going to keep track of monthly, a good friendly little competition. And at the end of the day, our goal as a club is to continue to be able to do great things for the city and for our communities. And the best way to do that is by growing our number of Rotarians. So this is something we will report on monthly, good little friendly internal challenge. And I'm looking forward to everybody inviting friends, inviting family to Rotary, make sure they're able to come in and check it out. So with that, Dan Buttery, President and CEO of the War Memorial Center, will introduce our speaker.
You'll also notice at your table a flyer for this Thursday with our very special guest, Chris Kolenda, again, will be speaking. When Chris and I were talking about this about 6-7 months ago, Afghanistan was not really in the headlines. We knew what was coming up, the 20th anniversary, and we wanted to anticipate the wraparound of events. And so at the time, Chris said, well, let's do a talk. It was based on what went right, what went wrong, and what America should do next. And oh my God, how appropriate will that? And I don't mean to take away from his talk today, but again, if you could, this is a ticketed event. It'll be here Thursday night going into the various events. So thank you again, Mary, for distributing these. Colonel Chris Kolenda, retired Army colonel, is author of Zero Sum Victory, What We're Getting Wrong About War, is the first American to have fought both the Taliban as a commander in combat and engaged them in peace talks. He now advises leaders on how to use military lessons to strengthen their businesses and gain dramatic competitive advantage. So please help me welcome Chris Kolenda.
Thank you very much, Dan. These last few weeks have been hard to watch in Afghanistan. And for veterans, people who spent a lot of time there, and people who've been watching Afghanistan with a lot of interest, I mean, a number of emotions go through my mind and the minds of others that I've spoken with. Anger. How is it that after 20 years at war, in this country, 20 years of building the Afghan government and security forces at a cost of $2 trillion, US alone, $2 trillion, and a sacrifice of over 2,300 American service members. And those include 6 of my soldiers who were killed in action. How is it that, and fighting an organization that was an international pariah in 2001, a ragtag militant group, how is it that the most powerful country in the world, supporting a government which we spent so lavishly and sacrificed so much, just simply evaporated overnight? I mean, there's a lot of people very angry about the disconnect between the sacrifices and the outcome. Disappointment at the chaos, that you see that we saw over the last week or so at the Kabul airport as Afghans are trying to get out, and the United States is trying to finalize this disengagement from the country. And then all the anxiety and fear for Afghan allies. 120-some thousand Afghans got evacuated in this chaotic airlift, which is an extraordinary feat. Unfortunately, very few of them were interpreters and people who worked for the United States military or government on the outposts. And so I get messages from a lot of my Afghan former interpreters and people who worked for us saying, I'm scared for my life. What do I do? How do I get out? And then, of course, there's the terrorism fear. What are the implications of all this? Of the Taliban coming back into power. And so what I'd like to discuss today is all of that, about why did we just witness the biggest foreign policy disaster in American history, which is exactly what it is. Why did that happen? What are the next steps? And then what are some things that we can take from it? So why the epic fail? I was at a commanders conference in 2013, and the 2-star general says to the 4-star general, "General, we have a big problem. The Afghans can't maintain the MRAPs, so these big mine-resistant vehicles, these ginormous vehicles, and the Humvees. And they're all deadlined, and what they're doing is they're sending soldiers out on pickup trucks. And those pickup trucks are very vulnerable to improvised explosive devices. And so the Afghans are losing a lot of soldiers, and the reason is because they don't know how to maintain the vehicles. So what we need to do is we need to send more contractors in to maintain their vehicles." And I looked at the general and I said, "General, I'd like to offer a different hypothesis. The MRAPs and the Humvees are gas-guzzling vehicles, while the pickup trucks are very fuel efficient comparatively. I'd be willing to bet that none of these vehicles are reported as broken because the commanders are still getting the fuel for these gas-guzzling vehicles and selling it on the black market." And that's exactly what was happening. Afghanistan in 2006 had begun to turn into what I call a predatory kleptocracy. So in a kleptocracy, people don't serve in government for the public good. They serve in government in order to plunder the country. And so Afghan officials would spend, if you wanted to be a brigadier general in the Afghan army, you spent maybe $100,000 to $200,000. You paid for that position. Those positions were for sale. You paid that amount of money. And in return, you would get the ability to use that position to recoup your investment and turn a profit. There were police chiefs that would go for $3 to $5 million US dollars. I had a conversation with the Afghan Minister of Finance several years ago, who was somebody trying to fix this corruption problem, and he said there is a customs official that just bought his position for $5 million. I said, you must mean 5 million Afghani, which is still an enormous amount of money. It's like $1 million. And he says, no, 5 million US dollars. Imagine how much money he believed he was going to make from his position. And so that's what a kleptocracy does. And it was predatory in the sense that officials were able to use their positions to steal land from Afghans, to kidnap people for ransom, to extort misappropriate our aid in development dollars. And all of these actions, this kleptocracy, as it grew from 2006 on, if this is your legitimacy line here, kleptocracy creates drift, and you drift further and further from the legitimacy line, and the longer you drift, the harder it is to jump back up. And by 2021, I mean, what we saw with the Afghan people voted with their feet to leave their government and accept the Taliban. So the first reason why the epic fail is the Afghan government simply failed to gain the buy-in of its people. And when the Afghan government began to vote with its feet away from the people in 2006 and did more and more so over time, then the people voted with their feet a couple of weeks ago to reject the government, and then senior officials in the government fled the country. The second reason is the Taliban had the three key ingredients to be successful as an insurgency. They had external sanctuary in Pakistan, Iran, and other countries. They had sufficient internal support in Afghanistan where they were able to continue fielding a team of fighters. And third is they were more innovative, politically, diplomatically, and militarily than either the Afghan government or us. I was in a meeting in Doha with the Taliban senior leadership, and I asked him. I said, "What do you want? What are your goals?" And he said, "We were a government once, and we were cut off from the international community. And our only source of support was Al-Qaeda. And we all know how that worked out." And he said, when we come back into government, we don't want a repeat of that experience. We want relationships with the international community, and in particular with the United States and with the West. And I asked him, why is that? I mean, we've been fighting each other at this point now for 10 or 11 years. So why is that? He said, because that's where the support that Afghanistan needs to survive as a country is going to come from. Not going to come from Russia or China, or not without huge strings attached. It's going to come from the West. It's the only way that we're going to survive as a country. Several years later, I met with another Taliban senior leader, again as a part of a process to get talks going. And I asked him the same question. I said, "What do you want? What are your goals?" This is 2017. What are your goals? And we were having coffee before the official meeting started. And he lifted up his coffee cup, as some of you are doing right now. And he said, "Cappuccino in Kabul." I said, "What?" We both got a chuckle out. I said, what do you mean? Help me understand this. And he said, "I want to be able to sit with my wife at an outdoor cafe in Kabul and drink cappuccino and not have to worry about getting blown up. And what struck me about these conversations and many others that I had with the Taliban is that they were a learning organization. Whereas the Afghan government had become very complacent, and I think the US government in many ways had become very complacent, believing that if we were doing the same thing over and over again, that we would get the same results. The Taliban were innovating. They were learning from their experiences. They were learning from the mistakes that we were making, and they were taking advantage of their opportunities. So whereas the Afghan government and we in many ways were drifting, the Taliban were innovating. They were moving upwards. And if you're standing still, if you're not innovating, your competition is, then you're falling further behind. And that's what we saw. Third is, and it pains me to say this, the United States was a poor partner for Afghanistan. Despite all of the resources and support that we gave them, we were poor partners in the following respects. The first one is we lost our way morally and strategically up front. Torture in places like Bagram and Guantanamo. And that word spreads among Afghans. In 2007, when I was out as a commander of about 800 paratroopers in the East, and I'd ask elders, "Hey, well, why are we fighting?" And they would say things like, "You're torturing our people in Guantanamo and Bagram." They would talk about civilian casualties that had happened in that area. And I don't know about you, but if the North Korean army or the Chinese army came into my neighborhood, came into this neighborhood and started shooting the place up, I know exactly what I'd be doing. And the Afghans had a very similar reaction. We had also failed to take yes for an answer. In December of 2001, the Taliban offered to surrender. And you can go to a New York Times story. There's a press conference between then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and Hamid Karzai when this question arises about the Taliban's surrender offer. And Secretary Rumsfeld said, no, these people need to be hunted down and captured. In 2003, the Taliban once again said, we just want to live in peace. We'll support the government. We just want to go back home and live in peace. And we in the Afghan government said, no. In 2011, 12, and 13, in the talks that I was involved with as the Secretary of Defense's personal representative, the Taliban's demands at that point for beginning talks with the Afghan government were really, really modest. I mean, things like they wanted 5 prisoners out of Guantanamo. They wanted a political office, and we had our demands of them as well. And we simply couldn't get our act together as a government. And those talks broke down. Now, this is when we had 100,000 US troops in the country. Our leverage for talks was as high as it was ever going to be. And we squandered the opportunity. In 2017, when I was talking with the Taliban political commission, again, this time outside of government, I asked them, I said, they wanted to get some talk started with the United States government. And I was like, why now? You know we're on the way out. Why now? And they said, we don't want our country to become another Syria. And if things continue going the way that they're going, it's going to become another Syria. And it still might. So we lost a lot of opportunities along the way to bring the war to a successful conclusion. We also, as poor partners, ignored the corruption problem. In part because we didn't understand it. We do a lot of mirror imaging. Oh, well, in America, US officials, you join the government, you join the military out of a sense of public service, not to get wealthy. In much of the developing world, it's totally different. You join the government to get wealthy. And if you're in a kleptocracy, you can get really, really wealthy really, really quickly. I was told that there was actually a queue to be the police chief in Helmand, which is one of the nastiest provinces in Afghanistan. People would serve for 6 months to be the police chief. They'd pay a few $1 million for it. And in exchange, what they were able to do is make money off the opium trade. Turn a huge profit very quickly within 6 months. Be able to turn a huge profit from the opium trade. And we ignored all of this, in part through the mirror imaging, in part because we didn't quite understand how the corruption was working, and then in part because we didn't know what to do. We had no idea what to do about it. And it often seemed that the cure was worse than the disease, or that's the way it was presented. And we just hoped the problem would go away or solve itself, and of course it never would. There was way too much money. A third about being poor partners is we created dependency. We created a security force and a government that is so dependent on US money and US support and firepower that it was unable to thrive without that support. I think what good partners do is they help people and organizations be the best version of themselves. What we instead created was a mini-me force that was supposed to look like our military and act like our military, and couldn't possibly do it. And when it looked like that support was going away, the organizations crumbled. And you could see a lot of these warning signs coming. But people were so busy breathing their own exhaust, believing their own propaganda, that they just refused. We just buried our head in the sand at these sort of problems. So that's why we're witnessing, those are three main reasons why we're witnessing the biggest disaster in U.S. foreign policy disaster in American history unfold before our eyes. So what's the way forward? I think the United States government needs to focus on three things. The first one is evacuation of the remaining American citizens in Afghanistan who want to get out. Evacuation of our allies, the people who served as interpreters, the people who served as workers on some of our outposts. You've heard a term, SIV, Special Immigrant Visa. So people who are eligible for special immigrant visas are those who served as interpreters or worked for the United States government in some way. We need to continue to work to get them, those who want to leave the country, out of the country. And I hope welcome them here in the United States for the ones that are here, that arrive here in America. Most of them came with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. Second is all of the humanitarian and human rights concerns that we have about Afghanistan, we need to continue to pursue. There are over 20 million Afghans facing starvation, critical food and water shortages. Afghanistan is the second worst place in the world to be a woman. And that's not just due to the Taliban, that's due to how that's Afghan society. It's in part Afghan society, in part the ongoing conflict. Second worst place in the world to be a woman. Afghanistan is one of the 2 countries on earth that still has polio. Now, fortunately, the Taliban also want to get rid of polio, and they've actually been working together with organizations like the Red Cross to try to get vaccines to, into Afghans. So you've got the humanitarian and human rights, and Afghanistan is also facing an economic collapse because they can't get any. They don't have a government, first of all, yet, and then second, they don't get access to whatever monies they have overseas, and so their economy is going into a slow motion collapse. So the second agenda is continue to work with whatever government in Afghanistan emerges on human rights. They ought to at least follow the International Declaration of Human Rights. On the dealing with the acute humanitarian crisis that Afghans are facing, and then helping them, working with them to restore an economy. And then third, of course, is counterterrorism. The Taliban has a relationship with Al Qaeda, but that is mainly an alliance of convenience. That they blame the Al Qaeda for the situation that they found themselves in. And so Al Qaeda is not a significant presence in Afghanistan and probably will become less over time. You do, however, have Islamic State in Afghanistan, and they and the Taliban have been fighting each other for years. But this is a real concern. And if Afghanistan does devolve into warring fiefdoms, where you get this civil war, Afghanistan looks like the next Syria, then the winner of that's going to be Islamic State. And that creates a terrorist threat here in the United States. So in our 2 choices, do we turn our backs on Afghanistan in frustration, or do we continue to engage with whatever government emerges in Afghanistan? And the Afghans plan to announce something within the week. It seems that we're better off on all 3. The evacuations, the humanitarian and human rights, and the counterterrorism, if we stay engaged in Afghanistan than if we turn our backs. Within the United States, what should the United States government do? Our track record with military interventions is really awful. And I write about some of this in Zero Sum Victory, which Dan mentioned. This is my new book coming out. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. I mean, they have all had major unintended consequences. In many cases have been absolute failures, or turned into quagmires. And these quagmires, are not okay. It is not okay to be in a country at war for 20 years and to believe that just simply bombing the country in what some people are calling a low-grade intervention, in which tens of thousands of Afghans are being killed and maimed every year, to think that is okay is absolutely unacceptable. Having these military interventions that turn into quagmires or create even bigger disasters is not right. And we need to fix it because we're making the same mistakes over and over and over again at each of these interventions. And so I hope 2 things happen. The first one is I hope that President Biden calls a 9/11 style commission, blue ribbon panel, to look at why our interventions are turning into quagmires and what national security reforms we need to make to prevent this from happening again. And second, that Congress begins to take its oversight mission more seriously. And instead of asking sort of cream puff questions at hearings or political posturing, we actually ask good questions and, as necessary, don't approve funding for some of these operations that have no clear strategy for success. As you know, there are a lot of Afghans who are coming into America right now. There are 13,000 right now at Fort McCoy, to include one of my former interpreters. Not my personal interpreter, but he worked for one of my units. His name is MJ. Could you go to the next slide, please? Here are some ways to help with the Afghan refugees. So there are 4 organizations in Wisconsin. So if you're interested in supporting organizations that are helping Afghan refugees, this is one way to do it. The other way to do it is, just welcoming people into our communities. These are people that are restarting their lives in many ways, arrived here with absolutely nothing. And the more that we can, help and support and welcome Afghans in our communities, I think the better off we're all going to be. Next slide. I'd be delighted to take your questions. Yes, sir.
There were probably more questions than there are answers. But one of the things that we have done with policies is nation building. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about having stuck strictly to military objectives rather than the nation building activities. And how that outcome would or could have changed the situation in Afghanistan.
Thanks. So the question is about, should we have just stuck with military operations in places like Afghanistan and Iraq? Was it a mistake to do nation building? In Afghanistan in 2001 this is a country that at that point had been devastated by 23 years of war. It was a complete wreck. And part of the reason why an organization like Al-Qaeda was able to be there is because it was just this chaotic, informally governed place that they could use. Al-Qaeda could use money to buy influence. And when you just look at the absolute wreck that this place was, they had nothing. You come very quickly away with the conclusion that in order to prevent Al-Qaeda from returning to a place like Afghanistan, returning to sanctuary, that you've got to support Afghanistan. You got to support this country getting back on its own feet. Where I think we went wrong is we tried to help too much. Rather than giving the Afghans, having the Afghans develop their plans and take ownership of them. We just did way too much. We started doing way too much mirror imaging and way too much creating things in our own image, and then just not holding the line on corruption. And so you have this situation where Afghan officials didn't have a stake in their own success. They weren't creating their own strategies and having to stand or fall based on the success of those. They're just being enabled by us. And so they never had to deal with the consequences of the corruption and deal with the consequences of hemorrhaging the legitimacy that they were hemorrhaging. So one of the things that we need to do better as we look at, how do you help post-conflict countries? That's one of the things that we need to examine. And sometimes doing less is more. I've found that when people have ownership in not only the solutions, but the execution of it, they tend to do much better. It's just like in any business. The people closest to the problem when they have ownership over solving it, they're going to do much better than if somebody's trying to solve it for them. Yes, sir.
How do you deal with the argument you cannot negotiate with the Taliban because you cannot trust them? Even if you can trust the person that you're talking with, that person doesn't have the ability to bring forth the same trust among people. Why even negotiate?
Well, I've personally found in my personal negotiation, and this is going to come as a shock. The question is why should we trust the Taliban? How do we know we can trust them? That why even bother speaking with them if we can't? And I mean, this will come as a shock. In my personal negotiations with the Taliban over 2 different periods of time, I found that the Taliban were more consistent in meeting their commitments to us than we were in meeting our commitments to them. I mean, just kind of let that sink in. The Taliban are very frustrating partners. You're negotiating partners. They see the world very differently than we do. They're not inclined to tell us what we want to hear. And the Afghan government would tell us what we wanted to hear and do something different. The Taliban will tell you what they think, and they follow through. It's just how I found the 2 organizations. So I think in anything, you've got to, Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. I think it's pretty good advice. In any negotiation, especially when we're starting off with in a very low trust environment, you've got to do things that build trust and confidence and test that trust and confidence along the way. And you start with baby steps. And when you meet those small hurdles, you're able to go bigger hurdles. And so I think that's the approach that we ought to be taking. We should have been taking with the Taliban all along, that I hope we take now, is, we start with baby steps. They're going to be testing us just like we ought to be testing them. And we need to condition our relationship based on what the Taliban do, not just what they say. Ms. Megan?
Plight of women and girls in Afghanistan right now is just a searing pain.
Right.
For me, and I know a lot of other women. In your negotiations with the Taliban, did you get an impression of their approach to that in the Taliban?
Yeah, no, thanks. The question is about the women in Afghanistan in the Taliban's policies towards women. I mean, there are no easy answers to this one at all, and part of it is because the Taliban's history. Part of it is because of the culture in Afghanistan, quite frankly. A culture where women are not treated equally. I mean, that's Afghan culture in many respects. And although you've had a Kabul-based elite where you've seen a lot of advances for women in terms of women serving in government, going to college, and having their own businesses, you don't see that same thing in the countryside. And over 70% of Afghans that live in the country. What I've found, though, is very interesting too, is that Afghans really want their girls to go to school. And in one particular village, we'd been getting rockets, 107 millimeter rockets shot from this village on one of our outposts. And it was getting really annoying. 107 millimeter rocket can send shrapnel about the length of this room. And we had no idea why they're shooting rockets at us. And so we decided, well, let's go find out. And we took the novel approach of actually talking to these villagers. And so one of my Afghan army counterparts, he went with his battalion and discovered that a couple of years beforehand there was a night raid in their village, and there were people felt humiliated. And so as a way of taking revenge, they would shoot rockets at us. And they've been doing this for the last couple of years. And okay, no, all right, what else did you find out? I said, well, I found out that they really want their kids to go to school. In the last 20 years, they haven't really been able to go to school. They don't have a building. They just have these 3 walls. And the girls go in the morning and the boys go in the afternoon, and they don't have notebooks and pens. They have one chalkboard where one of the kids will go up and write on the chalkboard. Otherwise, they draw numbers and letters in dirt with a stick. Well, we had been collecting school supplies. So I think one of the things that brings us together with people from different cultures and different parts of the world is we all want what's best for our kids. And so I asked him, would you be willing to go back to the village? He said, yeah, of course. And so a couple days later, we loaded up his trucks with school supplies, notebooks and pens. And he went and came back at the end of the day, and he said, yeah, they were very appreciative. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe we've got some way of, maybe we've started to build a bridge. The next day, I get a call from our front gate, the outpost. Sir, a bunch of Afghans want to see you. Where are they from? They're from Sao Village. It's the village, that in question, and let them in. And so we went around and introduced ourselves, and as I met the sort of head elder of the village, he hands me this stack of papers. And I said, what is this? He said, these are thank you notes from our kids, written on the notebooks and, written on the pens and paper that you gave them. And there are about 75 of them. He said, there would have been more, but they didn't think their handwriting was good enough for you. And your heart just melts. We wound up working with them to get a school there for their boys and their girls, and that school stands to this day. So I mean, there are protests in Afghanistan now by women, and I think the Taliban look at this, and and they see Afghan societies has changed, and if they're going to do one of two things. Either they're going to overreach and they're going to create a backlash. And then I think you get the warring fiefdoms problem. Or they're going to try to stay in step with where people are. I think it's going to be a long journey for women's rights in Afghanistan. And it's a journey that we can help them along with by conditioning our relationship based on human rights. But you don't get buy-in from the barrel of a gun. And that's what I also found. I'd like to offer just a couple of takeaways, and then talk about talk about my 6 fallen soldiers. So some of the things I take away from Afghanistan is when you gain buy-in. When you gain buy-in from people, whether it's in a country or whether it's in a business, when you gain buy-in, people give their discretionary effort. When people have buy-in, they do the right things the right way without anybody having to watch. And when they don't have buy-in, then people are going to vote with their feet at the first opportunity. The second is that innovation is applied ingenuity. And if we're standing still while our competitors are innovating, then we're not staying in the same place, we're falling behind. And so how are we innovating with our people, with our products, with our processes to continue to get better and avoid the complacency of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results. Third is, it's really important to nip drift in the bud. And whether it's corruption, whether it's things like sexual harassment or racism or just bad behavior at work, toxic behavior at work, nipping that in the bud is so much more effective than allowing it to continue. Because when we allow it to continue, it's like compounding interest. And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it becomes harder to correct the longer we allow it to go. And then fourth is, I think we have an obligation to help people be the best versions of themselves. Whether that's as country-to-country partners or as leaders in an organization, we have an obligation to help people be the best versions of themselves and not try to turn them into mini-me's or turn them into, force them to be something that they're not. And ultimately, I think the test is when we part ways. I believe this as a consultant. It's not about creating dependency. That's unethical. When we part ways, our clients, our customers ought to be able to soar to greater heights and not simply crash and burn. So those are 4 takeaways that I had from this experience that I think apply to everyday life as well as U.S.-Afghan relations. Could you go to the next slide? Very briefly, I just want to talk about the 6 soldiers that were killed in action. Under my command, we were serving in 2007 and 2008. Dave Voris, Captain Dave Voris, West Point graduate. Dave was like a little brother to me. His soldiers genuinely loved him. One of the most sincere, genuine people, extraordinarily good at what he did. He was leading a patrol, and when his vehicle struck an improvised explosive device, and he was killed instantly along with Adrian Hike, Sergeant Adrian Hike. Adrian was one of the first soldiers that I had decorated with a medal. He had earned a Purple Heart in Iraq, and when we had come back from Iraq, I remember pinning the Purple Heart on Adrian. He had very severe post-traumatic stress. I mean, you don't come away from combat without some form of, without being affected by it. And that post-traumatic stress, he got in a lot of trouble. And got eventually busted down to private and worked his way back up. I said, because he was able to, he got the support that he needed to help him with the PT, with the post-traumatic stress. And he bounced back, and he bounced back stronger. And I couldn't have been more proud of anybody, the 800 soldiers in that unit. And he was killed along with Dave. Tom Bostic was also a troop commander like Dave in a big firefight on July 27th of 2007, the biggest one we had in the 15 months there. We had this firefight for about 3 or 4 hours in the morning. And I remember talking to Tom when there was a lull in the fight. And I asked Tom, I said, how are things going? And so he gave me a great update and told me what he was doing. And then there was like this silence throughout the mountain valley for about 90 minutes. And that's when I heard it. I heard this gigantic boom that echoes down the mountain valley. And all the fighting, came out with even greater intensity. And I looked, and then I heard a radio transmission that says, the CP has been hit. CP means command post. That meant Tom was under direct fire. And so I gave it some time because I didn't want to bother him when he's fighting for his life. And Bulldog 6, that was his call sign, Bulldog 6. I was Saber 6. Bulldog 6 is Saber 6. No answer. Bulldog 6 is Saber 6. Silence. Bulldog 6 is the Saber 6. Now, what I heard next, on the one hand, made me very proud. Dave's sergeants and his lieutenants coordinating with one another, calling in air and artillery strikes, taking the fight to the enemy, exactly how Tom taught them how to do it. And on the other level, I knew. And that boom, I can still hear it in my head right now. That boom was a rocket-propelled grenade that had killed Tom. When a big insurgent force came on his position, he directed the other 4 people of his command post to move to a different, more secure location. And Tom put himself in the line of fire so that they could get back to safety. And as he was engaging the enemy, that's when the grenade hit him, a rocket-propelled grenade hit him. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which is our country's second highest medal for valor. Ryan Fritchie was killed that same day in that same firefight. He was a staff sergeant, and on his first patrol as a squad leader, he worked on the staff for a long time, and very, very beloved person, and left behind his wife Brandy. Jacob Lowell was our first soldier killed in action. He was a gunner on a Humvee, and in the firefight, he got hit in the leg, and instead of going down, he jumped back up on his machine gun and continued engaging the enemy, saving lives of his people in his platoon, and he was awarded the Bronze Star for valor. Our last soldier, on the slide, Chris Pfeiffer, he was mortally wounded on August 25th of 2007. He was shot in an attack on one of the outposts, and it just missed his body armor, nicked his liver. And so Chris was bleeding. The medics were finally able to get him stable enough to fly him to our main outpost. And I remember helping carry the litter from the helicopter into our aid station and talking to him along the way. And he would look at me, but you could tell he looked where I was talking, but you could tell he couldn't see anything. In shock, loss of blood. Eventually lost so much blood that the doctors ran out of blood bags and had to call for people to donate blood. And we had about 40 soldiers in the outpost, O negative blood types, all line up to donate blood to Chris. He stabilizes enough that we eventually get him to San Antonio. And on September 25th, he died of wounds. The next day, September 26th, his daughter Peyton was born. So those are the 6 people that I served with that were killed in action. Could you go to the next slide? I want to visit their grave sites, and I thought, I want to do something. I want to do something special. I could drive to each one of them, but it just didn't seem right to me. So I decided I'm going to pedal a bike. I'm going to pedal a bike and I'm going to visit each of their grave sites. And you see Chris Pfeiffer is buried in Spalding, Nebraska, and then all the way Tom Bostic in Arlington National Cemetery. It's 1,689 miles, at least by Google Maps. And so I'm going to undertake this in October of next year. And I also wanted to do something, that not just a single event, but something that would hopefully be a part of their legacies. And so I spoke with Mary and said, "Hey, Mary, if I did this and turned it into a fundraiser, would we be able to do a scholarship endowment in their names?" And she said, yeah, we can make that happen. So go ahead with the next one. So that's exactly what we're going to do is, yeah, put together this GoFundMe, Fallen Hero Honor Ride. And my goal is to be able to raise at least $100,000 for an endowment for the Milwaukee Rotary Club. So I want to take care of my community family, and then also $100,000 for a scholarship endowment with the 173rd Airborne. So if you, I appreciate Mary allowing me to do this, to help do something positive for Milwaukee and and honor their legacies in that way. And at $100,000, that'll be in perpetuity. So if that's something of interest, thanks. So please feel free to share that. I've been training, it's a long ways. And fortunately, I've got some good advice and support. So I'll keep you informed about how that goes. But I want to thank you for your attention and support through all of that and through this afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Wow. Well, Chris, thank you very much. Thank you to your sacrifices and the sacrifices of your team. And thank you for coming back to speak to us on a topic that, I think last time you spoke, we'd all hoped we'd be in a much different position at this point. So we appreciate your heartfelt insights into a topic I know everybody in this room cares pretty deeply about. And in honor of leaders like you coming and speaking to our club, we're going to make a donation to the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. So thank you. Please join us next week, Tuesday. Tom Barrett will be here, who was recently nominated as the new ambassador to Luxembourg. A couple quick reminders. The Rotary Social, September 15th, is at the Yacht Club. And most importantly, again, October 5th, please join us here in this room with Peter Fagan for our first breakfast meeting. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.